So Bob, this is where where IDEO comes in, and I'm with Jim Hackett. I really believe in design thinking, and that design thinking can solve a lot of problems. And for those who aren't designers in the audience, can you kind of define design thinking for us so that, first of all, we know where we're coming from?
Yeah, the idea that, through the development of the discipline of design, if we can call it that, or the lack of discipline of design, that we've developed a process that has become increasingly human-centered, through the last century, and actually is quite an effective way of taking on many types of problems, particularly problems that are complex and that require a sort of qualitative type of synthesis to be able to parse. And I think the realization in recent years has been that that process is actually quite useful when applied to any number of problems, aside from just designing objects or widgets or what have you. And increasingly, this is becoming the leading edge of design. So Jim Hackett and James Ludwig here and many of the folks at Steelcase have been leading sort of proponents and advocates of this application within the context of the business here and in other areas. And I think it's quite exciting. But the big questions we can ask, and I think it alludes to my earlier comment, is what does design for policy look like? We know how to design things for people. We're getting pretty good at designing things for business, but there's this thing in the middle that's about regulation and legislation and policy. We don't really apply our tool set to that yet. I mean, go to Washington and start to talk to people about innovation, and you're going to draw a lot of blank stares. But there's an increasing interest now within policy, for instance, in the application of some of these techniques to thinking about the problems that are at hand there. If you look at Wright's work and his proposals around his Broadacre idea, I mean, he was hungering to design sort of a larger vision of society or civilization or what you want to call it, and actually be able to touch all the pieces of that. He wasn't really able to do that, but I think that same aspiration and the excitement about increasingly being able to think through these problems in a systemic way is very, very current and interesting to us.
Let's say if we really did our job, begin to do our job the way systems thinkers might do this, that when a product is designed, it's not only designed as a product, but as a system of production, of material gathering, reclamation, finding, processing. So it's a pricing, distribution. So I mean, it is a very complex web of activities that we're talking about here, which we don't know how to do. We know parts of it.
Well, yeah, and I think importantly, none of us can do it by ourselves. Yeah. And I feel that within design particularly, for a long time we've believed in the myth of the lone genius, right? That somebody's there behind their drafting board or what have you, coming up with these brilliant ideas out of space and throwing them out there into the world. But the fact is we need, just as you've said, we need all of this diverse thinking to inform the way that we work as designers, whether it's from biology, anthropology, sociology, these disciplines to come together. And the fact is that, our science isn't even equipped for that. I mean, the whole sort of development of our reductionist approach to science, where we can isolate, one variable and tweak it to find one result, it doesn't speak to this to really dealing with complexity and chaos and the things that we need to be able to deal with to solve these larger problems. So once again, it feels like we're kind of on the edge of starting to sort out some of these bigger issues, and we've got to get all of our systems into place to do it, which is daunting, but at the other time, on the other hand, it's very exciting.
It's very exciting, and we're asking the questions. Toshiko?
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to say that back to Frank Lloyd Wright, he is the one iconic figure which is often thought of as the lone genius type. And then that's total mistake, because in fact around 1950 he made a big speech in Chicago chapter of American Institute of Architects against American Institute of Architects, saying that it's an absolute mistake. It should have been American Institute of Architecture, because we all practice in the service of a discipline, and once you put designers as a forefront of important figure in a society, it would totally destroy the disciplinary integrity. It's absolutely, he's right about this. He actually knew of all the egos and all the contradictory personality, but all he did was in the service of a discipline of architecture. He needed to do what he needed to do to really broaden the reach of architecture and design into society, and that is a total, it's an amazing role, misunderstood, but I think that's what we are missing in terms of a global engagement. Why are we not involved in energy crisis, food security, water resources? Where policy? Where can we get ourselves more involved? If Frank Lloyd Wright were alive, your question, he would be jumping into global crisis right now, working with everybody as a responsibility of individual to broaden the discipline of design.
You know, I'm always a little cautious with these big terms, design thinking. It's a great term. But what we see in Frank Lloyd Wright, which is sort of extraordinary, is that coming out of the arts and crafts movement, there is a desire to maintain craft, whatever craft is. And craft has been machined there, but it talks to a level of detail, it talks to a level of interest and intrigue and making. So maybe the process of making has changed, but the making continues. And the reason I'm cautious is that design thinking has become another buzzword, and so I hear increasingly of more and more curricula around the country where they're focusing more and more on just the process of thinking rather than also learning about the process of making and a much bigger integrated process of design, so that it would be very important thinking about the future to just make sure that we don't, while we progress and we think about expanding design into all these realms of, much expanded realms of policy and government and economies and much bigger areas, that we don't lose sight of the actual making of it.
I think what you said is really important, to keep the fine grain and keep the big idea, and that design can do both of those. And in the person of Wright, it existed. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to James, and I will thank everyone for being a great audience and a wonderful panel.
After that, I feel very rich. I'm sure you do too. So I want to thank the panelists and Susan again one more time very warmly. I also want to thank, oddly enough, the generation of Steelcase leadership that had the foresight to take a derelict house and turn it into the gem that it is today. Not only, yeah. So, they're not. Some of them aren't with us. Some of them aren't with us today. But I think if they saw how that wasn't, again, looking back at the past, but actually became, in a way, the genesis for a discussion about looking at our future and our present, like we did today. I think that was profoundly visionary, and I feel very appreciative to partake in that sort of experience. And finally, I want to thank you for being interested and engaged, because I want to give you an assignment, which is to not stop today in a way of having consumed this wonderful experience, but also participating in that. So go to the website and post a comment. Put our link in your blog, tweet your peeps, whatever you do to create and get the network, you know, discussing some of these really deep issues that are facing us today, that are, in a way, spawned by a humble little house in a Midwest town. Thank you very much.